All of us who have ever moved know that calling it a frustrating process is a serious understatement. Besides packing up and taking stock of everything I own, I also had to physically get my stuff from one place to another. And once I was at my new place, I actually had to get it inside. Now, my new flat is amazing in many ways. It's the entire ground floor of an old building with a private backyard, which is great for the dog, and I love once it will be warmer outside. However, it has a very narrow entrance and a curve right at the entrance. This proved to be a challenge when trying to get furniture inside. So what did I have to do? I actually had to take out a window in order to get my furniture in. How many of us are taking out windows on a daily basis just to accomplish the tasks that we need to write code for our projects? By relying on outdated tools and processes, we are often forcing our contributors to take out windows, and sometimes even worse, in order to contribute code to our projects. Build tools, test tools, the Toolbox developer tools, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's all about the experience of contributing. This is the story of the evolution of the WordPress toolbox. WordPress is a project that had 283 individuals contribute code to its most recent release, and this was over a short 3-month period. My flat was built over 100 years ago, so it's showing its age. WordPress as a project is now almost 12 years old, which is about 100 in terms of buildings, and it's showing its age. But over the last year and a half, we've actually made a big effort to modernize our toolbox and improve the experience of contributing code. So in order to start looking at our build process, we need to actually look back, and look back to when WordPress started, which was 2003. The build and test tool landscape in 2003 was a lot different than it is today. Make was probably the best tool out there if you wanted to automate tasks. And Make is great, it's powerful, but it's not necessarily the simplest or easiest to learn, and it's not necessarily the easiest for reusability. So you want reusability? Well, you have a project called Ant that you can use. And Ant is great if you like writing XML. And if you like writing XML, I have never met you. No one likes writing XML that I know of. And then if you wanted to test your JavaScript, you had one person's idea of what proper JavaScript looked like. So you had to use JSLint, and you had to use one person's specific rules for what JavaScript looked like. If you wanted to test your PHP code, do any sort of unit testing, you had one option, which was Simple Test. And this is the only unit testing framework that I could find for PHP that was around in 2003. Now, I wasn't a developer in 2003, so there may have been others, but if there were, their existence has been wiped from the internet. So let's fast forward. Let's fast forward to 2013. Now we have tools like Grunt. Grunt is a JavaScript task runner. It allows us to write JavaScript, and if you have a web application, odds are there is some JavaScript already in your application. If it's a pure PHP application, you can use Fing. Now, Fing is a pure PHP task runner, but it suffers from the same problem of Ant in that you have to write XML. If you want to test the syntax of your JavaScript, you now can define your own rules using JSHint. If you just want to test it and make sure that you don't have syntax errors, you can use JSValidate. You can actually remove all the rules other than what the browsers are going to be using. If you want to test your PHP code, we actually have options now. We have PHP Unit, we have PHP Spec, we have Behat. We're not bound to one idea of what testing should be. We actually can choose the one that fits our project, that fits us as developers best. If you want to write JavaScript unit tests, you have options as well. These options did not exist in 2003. There were no JavaScript unit testing frameworks that I could find then. But now you have QUnit, you have Mocha, you have Jasmine, and you have many more. We have options, and more options today. Every day, new and new build tools are coming out that we can use. But for WordPress, 2013 still looked an awful lot like 2003. Our build tools had not kept up with the times. We had a separate repository just for unit tests. So instead of our tests and our code living together side by side, they lived off in separate worlds. We had bots running behind the scenes doing things like automating translations or compiling and minifying our JavaScript. No one knew what, besides a handful of people, what these bots were doing. They were hidden from public view. We're an open source project, yet we were hiding things from our contributors and from our community. We also had no JavaScript unit tests whatsoever. Our JavaScript could break, and unless someone actually noticed, physically tested and noticed, we had no idea what was breaking. We had no CI whatsoever, so every time we wanted to run our unit tests, we manually had to run our unit tests. This led to lots and lots of problems. For a software project as big as WordPress that powers as many websites as WordPress, it's a wonder that in 2013 we were as successful as we were. And it was largely because we as people were investing way more time than we should have. Our tests were hidden, and so many people didn't even know that we had unit tests. Our tests thus became harder for people to use. Because they weren't at the forefront, many contributors were submitting new features without any sort of testing behind it. They didn't have any idea that we even had tests or how to run our tests. Our tests were not easy to run. You had to go through a lot more work just to run your tests. Our tools being hidden meant that people didn't know how we were doing things. This led to lots of chances where we were missing the opportunity to optimize and improve our tooling. Because it was only a select few committers that had access to our build tools, only a select few could actually work on them. So we began a process of actually analyzing what should be our philosophy of tooling. What should tooling be? And so to start, the idea kind of became, we wanted to make contributing code easy. And this seems like a great idea at first glance, except that the issue is rarely for an open source project that's large and has many contributors at getting code in. Like, you can get 500 patches submitted in a day, but it's not going to help you. Because bad patches, at the end of the day, make more work. It makes it harder. So instead of making contributing code easy, what about making contributing quality code easy? Well, that still is leading to lots and lots of patches, and many of them aren't going to be easy. So instead, we want to make contributing quality code as easy as it should be. We want to have barriers, but only have our barriers on purpose. We never want to have a barrier to contributing code that we didn't agree on as a project of wanting to have. Nothing should be out of our control. We should own the experience of contributing to our project. So as a big project, we needed to have big goals. So our first goal of this entire project was that it had to be non-breaking. We didn't want to break any contributor's individual flow. It was never possible. We didn't want to break any sites that relied upon the existing workflow and the existing setup. We wanted to have more tools. We just simply didn't have enough. There were many tasks that were still being done by hand on a regular basis. We wanted to have more testing. It's great to have unit tests, but if you don't have enough and you don't have the right ones, they're not necessarily actually helping your project. We also really wanted to have more transparency. There just simply wasn't enough. As an open source project, in order for us to be solid open source citizens, we had to open up our process to the entire community, both the internal WordPress community and the larger developer and open source community in the world. We wanted to continue to make it easier to develop WordPress. Lots of people have called WordPress a gateway drug to open source. We pride ourselves on having a low barrier to entry. We don't want to have overly complicated rules. We want a high number of contributors, because the more people that are contributing, the more people that are getting involved in open source. And maybe they might not stick with WordPress. And that's fine. Maybe WordPress isn't the project for them, but getting them to bite into open source is going to help them as developers. As Yitz focused on this morning, open source is a great way for you to improve as a developer. So this process of making it easier and easier to contribute really helps us as a project. And so we wanted to keep that as a large goal. But in addition to being easier to contribute, we did want to make it so that we had better patches. We didn't want to get fluff. We didn't want to get, code that wasn't going to be usable. We wanted to help new contributors and experienced contributors have a good patch on day one. So this is what we started. First, we had one repository at the time. We had core.svn.wordpress.org. Yes, SVN. No, it's not the popular these days, but it's what we had. And so we started there. And one of the first things we worked on was becoming more version control agnostic. So if you used SVN or didn't want to use SVN, you wanted to use Git, we can make that work. We also can make it work so that we have multiple different repositories that people can use. So we kept the core.svn repository, added Git repositories, and added another repository called develop. So in actuality, while we kept one repository, it became 4. So core.svn, the code now actually lives inside our develop.svn repository. Develop.svn includes our tests, includes tooling, and includes a source directory. And this source directory then gets compiled on our build server using a build process that's public, that's in our Grunt file, and becomes the core.svn repository. So anyone that was using core.svn can still use it exactly the same way. And this is synced on a post-commit hook. Every time someone commits code to develop, it automatically is synced over to core. So core SVN still works exactly the same way. Many sites in WordPress run our trunk version. My site does, many of the developers, a handful of people that decide that it's much more important for us to eat our own dog food than to have a perfectly stable and perfectly wonderfully working site. And so we often run it out of SVN checkouts. And our work made it so that this was still possible. We didn't break anyone's site by doing it. We also made the decision that we weren't going to stop people from contributing patches that came from core SVN. There's so much documentation that was built up over the 10 years of the WordPress project that by suddenly deciding that we no longer were using that repository, we were actually going to hurt ourselves as a project. Why do we want to suddenly break all of this documentation that's out there that many people have spent years working on, when what we can do is fix it in our side, in our tooling? And Develop SVN, it has everything now. It has the new happy. So I mentioned being version control agnostic. So we have all of these SVN repositories. We also have the equivalent Git repositories. So we have Git core, that's a mirror of SVN core. We have Git develop, that's a mirror of SVN develop. And for anyone that wants to contribute, so for the 283 people that contributed code to our most recent release, they can use whichever of these repositories they feel most comfortable using. They know SVN and don't know Git, they can use SVN. You know Git and don't know SVN, use Git. It doesn't matter. Use what you feel most comfortable using. It only matters to the 18 people that actually have committed code to the most recent release. So it's about 15-to-1 ratio of people that it matters to. We only commit our code to SVN, but we create patches off of both. So after we did that work, we've started focusing on creating more and more tooling. So first we had to choose a task runner, and we chose Grunt. Now Grunt enabled us to easily do many, many things. It enabled us to easily decide that we were going to group our tasks based on specific activities. We also had to decide, why we wanted to use Grunt. And one of the biggest things for us is that Grunt was already a stable and mature product. WordPress is, as a large project, we tend to move slow at times. We like things that are more stable. We believe that when we adopt a project as a dependency, we have to take ownership of that project's bugs. That if someone finds an issue with Grunt, we need to be able to either submit a patch upstream or work with the team upstream to get the patch, to get them to work on a patch. Because at the end of the day, it's our developers that are experiencing the pain point. And so we liked that it was stable. We also liked that Grunt had a very large community at the time. And so that meant that there were lots and lots of modules pre-built for Grunt that we could take advantage of from day one. Grunt also enabled us to very easily group our tasks by specific actions. So we wanted a task that would run right before as a pre-commit hook, essentially. And since our committers are using SVN, we don't actually get the benefit of client-side pre-commit hooks, but we can have a Grunt task that's Grunt pre-commit that takes those tasks and enables them to be easily replicated and easily rerun. We also can create tasks that are specific to run on our CI environments, and so that we can automate that process incredibly easy. Grunt also enabled us to very easily build our own tools, and tools that we wanted to use. And so the first one that we built is called Grunt Patch WordPress. So I mentioned that we had 4 repositories, 2 SVN repositories, 2 Git repositories. This can create a lot of work when it comes to actually applying patches locally. So being version control agnostic meant that we also had to be patch creation agnostic. And so we had to simplify the steps of actually applying a patch. What it looked like before, you had to use wget or curl to get your patch. You had to actually physically inspect it to look and see how was this patch created. You had to try applying the patch, and odds are you screwed up step 2, so you had to go back and try it again. Let's automate that. So now applying a patch is as easy as running grunt patch with a ticket number. This will go on our track system, get all of the patches assigned to that ticket, and enable you to easily choose which one you want to apply locally and have it happen for you right away. So one command for all patch application, no matter how the patch was created off of any of our repositories. We also built it in such a way that our sibling projects could use it. So WordPress has 2 main sibling projects, BuddyPress, a social networking software, and BBPress, forum software. Both of these immediately were able to take advantage and use Grunt Patch WordPress. It's also available for any other track-based projects to use. If you're using track and want to use it, this is on my GitHub. Please grab it, use it. Let me know how I can help you use it better. What I can change in it in order to make it work for your project. Because in the end, we don't just want to help out our community, we want to help out every community. The next step for Grunt Patch WordPress is actually going to be uploading patches via the command line so that we can very easily automate that process and remove a couple of steps of having to go into your browser, click upload, choose a patch. That can be way too time consuming. We can automate it, and that's going to be the next step for Grunt Patch WordPress. A second tool that we created for our use and for the larger web community's use is Grunt CSS JS. So CSS JS is a project that easily makes automating right-to-left CSS possible. So if you work on a project that's internationalized, that you support languages that are both left to right and right to left, you know that it can be a hassle to create the CSS for right to left in a consistent and easy manner. You have to adjust the paddings and switch them around. You know, the rights become the lefts become the rights, the align lefts become the align rights. It's a lot of work. CSS JS makes it easy and automates that process. However, it didn't have any sort of Grunt version. It wasn't automated in use in our task runner. So a member of the WordPress core team worked on Gruntifying it and contributed it back to the community, and it's since actually been adopted by the CSS JS team. Since doing this, we've actually had very, very few right-to-left specific commits. In fact, we went over 10 months without having any commits to our repository that were fixing a specific right-to-left bug. CSS JS took care of everything for us. All we had to do was test, and which we were going to do anyways. It really lowered the barrier to contributing to our project. You no longer had to ask a developer to do both a left to right version and a right to left version. You could actually ask them to just do the one version, and this process would automate it for them. However, CSS JS over the last year has actually proven to not be perfect. It has somewhat of a slower development cycle. It's now missing some more CSS3 tools. So we're actually going to be switching, I'll likely commit this today, to Grunt RTL CSS. It's a very similar tool and does almost the exact same thing, except that it has a quicker release cycle right now, and it also has better support for a lot of CSS3 properties. We also started a process to start using JS Hint. Before, all of our syntax checking for JavaScript was done manually. It can be a slow process. So we began using JS Hint, and it really became a team effort in order to update all of our JavaScript files in order to be compliant with the JS Hint rules that we defined. So we decided to tackle it one file at a time. We created a grunt command so that we could filter and just run JS Hint on that specific file. And so over a period of about 2 weeks, individuals signed up to work on a file, had about 2 or 3 days to work on it and submit a patch that got tested and got committed. And so it only took us about 2 weeks, which is relatively fast for WordPress, to update all of our JavaScript files to have the syntax that we wanted to have. So next, what about PHP Code Sniffer to do the exact same thing for our PHP code? Well, we actually found a problem with JS Hint, and it's not a problem with the actual project, but a problem with our workflow. And it's that stylistic changes pollute the history of the project. And blame is one of a debugger's best friend. A good commit message doesn't just say what is happening, but why it's happening, why a change is being made. And having to go back through multiple rounds of blame just to find out the why code was originally changed added work on to our team. So we try to avoid stylistic changes only. And so we have a couple of people working on PHP Code Sniffer, but only for change sets, so that the only code that's linted and checked by the Code Sniffer is the code that's being changed. So over time, as we work on the various aspects of our code base, we can fix each piece as it makes sense to fix it, as a part of updating, and not as a specific style change. We've also started using JS Validate. So JS Validate is essentially a no rules linter. All it does is make sure that the code has the right syntax that the browsers want. So you don't have trailing commas that are going to mess with Internet Explorer, things like that. And we can actually run JS Validate on our code and catch any sort of minification bugs that crop up. So we can run it on our compiled code as a verification step automatically. We wanted, as one of our goals, to have more testing. We had some, but we didn't have enough. So we were already using PHP Unit for our unit tests, and for us, we decided to stick with it, at least for the time being, because it provides all the tools that we need. By having this one repository, we were actually able to start having our tests and code come in the same commit. Before, it became a regular habit of tests would be written on an open ticket, and they would get committed to our test repository, but then it would be skipped. Our test runner would actually check to see if a ticket was open and not run the test if the ticket that a test was assigned to was still open. This meant that we had lots and lots of tests that were not being run on a regular basis. And tests that aren't being run aren't doing any good. And so we've started removing those so that they can go back in when we have code to fix the bugs, and can actually look at our test code and have a much better sense of what we have coverage for and what we're really testing. In the year before we combined our repositories, we had 136 new assertions added. In the 8 months after, we had 382. So we've more than doubled the amount of tests that we are adding in a year. We're actually getting more and more tests. In addition to our PHP tests, we now also have JavaScript tests. And our first step was picking out a framework that we wanted to use. And so we looked at a couple. We looked at Mocha, we looked at QUnit, we looked at Jasmine. After analyzing them, after looking at them as both a project and as code, we decided upon QUnit. QUnit is a project of the jQuery, is a sub-project of jQuery. So what the jQuery team uses to test jQuery. WordPress and jQuery have a great relationship. If you don't know, all of the jQuery websites actually run on WordPress. And we work with their team, they work with our team. And so combining and using QUnit just made a lot of sense for us. We also started using sign-in for insertion dependency in JavaScript unit tests. And to tie in all of our unit tests, we've started using Travis CI. Travis has proven incredibly beneficial. We're catching our bugs earlier. We still support PHP 5.2 because our users still use PHP 5.2, and we aren't going to abandon our users who have no idea what PHP is. And so we need a way to easily test PHP 5.2. And Travis has really helped us in this regard. It's helped us create better patches. In addition to these tools for better patches, We've also added a couple of other tools. We started using editor config. And so this enables any IDE or text editor that is configured to look for an editor config file to automatically pick up that we want tabs for these files, spaces for this style file, 4 spaces for JSON files, 2 spaces for other files, and we never have to have people remember what they want. We have it all written down and included in the repository. We've also tried to really make it so that we have happier, better CSS. Until about a year ago, the core admin CSS WordPress file was over 30,000 lines long. Contributing to it thus was almost impossible for the average developer. It was not something that you could easily go into in Grok. No one should ever have to read a 30,000 line long file. So we broke it up, and we started using a tool called Auto Prefixer so that we no longer had to manually add in our browser prefixes. We didn't have to keep track of, what version of Chrome did they stop using the -webkit prefix for this CSS variable. We can automate that using Auto Prefixer. We've also started taking baby steps into using Sass. We've talked about and had spirited debates over wholesale switches to Sass or to another CSS preprocessor. However, just switching for us right now wouldn't be enough. Our CSS code is still in pretty bad shape. Despite splitting it up, we still have very long files that not many people understand, that not many people feel comfortable making changes to. And so we're using Sass where it makes sense to in new features. We introduced a new color picker for the admin, and all of that is based on Sass. As we work on more and more features, we may add more and more Sass in the places that it makes the most sense. Our changes for the experience, though, weren't just about changes to our code. It was really about changes to our experience of contributing. And part of that involves our use of track. We've started to really customize track in order to better fit our workflow. It's all about us owning our experience, about the barriers that exist to contributing code being the ones that we specifically want to exist, not accidentally there. And so now on track, when a committer comments, it's noted that they're a committer. So a new person isn't confused, who's this Aaron Jorbin guy telling me my syntax is wrong and that I'm supposed to use tabs instead of spaces. They know I'm a core committer and that I can help, I'm there to help them. Additionally, all of our bug gardeners and committers know when a person is a new contributor. For the person's first 4 tickets that they open, we have a small note. Now, we try to be nice and respectful of everyone, but it allows us to know that, this person is new to the WordPress project. Make sure to say howdy. Make sure to make them feel welcome. Because if we can make them feel welcome for their first couple of tickets, hopefully they'll come back and contribute more and more tickets. We've also really had our community drive a lot of this. It's not just the internal core team making the decisions, it's us working with the broader community and contributing back to them and pulling our changes up from them. So our sibling projects all drive each other. As one committer on a sibling project figures out an issue with a build tool, they'll report it to the other projects. And so we're all working together on a regular basis to improve our build tools, to improve our test tools. We also have a sibling project called WP CLI, which is a command line WordPress. If you've ever used Drush for Drupal, it's pretty much the same thing. And we include some configuration in our core repository to make the use of WP CLI even easier. Our community has also built tools such as varying vagrants. It's a vagrant setup for WordPress that's designed to make it simple and easy to develop WordPress sites. And when we made the switch to the new develop repository, that same day, members of our core team were submitting pull requests to varying vagrants in order to make them available in that project and make all of the build and test tools ready and usable by the community. Varying vagrants also has its own tools and community building tools for it. They've built a tool called variable varying vagrants, which is entirely too many V's. And it makes it easy to set up new sites in Vagrant. Other projects include Salty WordPress, which is very similar except it uses salt as its configuration, and VCCW, which uses Chef for its configuration. All of this work on build and test tools has taught us some incredibly important lessons that you can take back to your projects, and that if we were doing this again, we would have learned from. The first is it's incredibly important to have goals, to set goals early when working on a project. By us deciding on the fact that we wanted to make sure that by adding our test tools, we didn't raise the barrier to contributions, that we in fact were lowering it, every decision that we make along the process can be focused on that goal and on what we can do to achieve that goal. We didn't want to create any new headaches in any new projects. We had one repository that people were creating patches out of. Now we have 4. This easily could have introduced a million headaches, and for a little while it did, until we created Grunt Patch WordPress to solve it. Instead of having problems become roadblocks, we allowed a problem to become a challenge and allowed us to improve a process that even before had been multiple steps. Even when we had one repository, you still had to get the patch and you still had to apply the patch. And yes, you didn't have to remember if it was patch level 1 or patch level 0. And you didn't have to know if it was a Git-based or SVN-based. You still had to get it and apply it. That's 2 steps. Now it's 1. And so it's simpler. It's important to learn from yourself. If you are a solo developer on a project, you might think, well, this experience works for me. But you have to ask yourself, does it really work for you? Take a look at your bash history. How many times are you repeating the same commands over and over again? That you're doing 3 steps in sequence every day, multiple times a day. If you're doing that, you should automate it. You should not have to do 3 steps in a row to complete a task. You should be able to do just 1. So learn from yourself. If you're a larger project, ask all of your contributors, what are the steps that you're taking every day? Ask yourself, how are we getting code from our repository onto our server? Is it 1 step? If it's not 1 step, how can we make it 1 step? How can we simplify it? Are there roadblocks that we don't want that are there? And we can eliminate those roadblocks. I'm a big fan of, on my personal projects, of having theme days. I have Metrics Monday. Every Monday I try to focus on my personal projects of adding in new metrics or of figuring out a new way to analyze my metrics. I have Tooling Tuesday. Every Tuesday, I focus on my tools, on ways, not on writing new features, but on making it easier to have new features. Having these themes make it easy to always focus on improving things. In addition to learning from ourselves, you have to support the community that your project has. Even if you're a company with 3 developers, with 5 developers on a project, Your team is your community, and you need to support them. You also need to support the larger community. Open source your tools as you create them. Write a blog post, give a speech about the tools that you use. This can be a 5-minute lightning talk to your local user group. But by sharing these ideas, you're going to help every other developer learn about build tools and about ways to improve their experience as developers. Finally, you have to remember that you own your dependencies bugs. If there is a bug in a project that your project uses, it's your project's bug until it's fixed. Whether you create a workaround, whether you create a patch upstream, whether you adopt it and fork it temporarily or permanently, it's your bug until it's fixed. A user doesn't care that, oh, this bug is in jQuery. They don't know what jQuery is. They just know that your site has a bug. So you have to own those bugs, and you have to not blame other projects for problems, but fix them in your own. My name is Aaron Jorbin. I'm a technical architect at Condé Nast and a WordPress core committer. I blog at aaron.jorb.in, and I'm on Twitter at aaronjorbin. Thank you. Can I answer any questions? Wait for the mic. It's on its way.
Hi, I'm Paul. Sorry. Can I actually submit a Git pull request to core to fix a patch, or do I still have to convert it to SVN patch?
You can submit a git diff. So use the git diff command and pipe it to a file. We're not taking pull requests on GitHub quite yet. We actually have a team working on that, though. We want to be able to, in addition to being version control agnostic, actually become even more agnostic about where our contributions are coming from. But from now, you can use git diff, pipe that into a file, and upload that to track.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, I've committed stuff in the past and had very rude responses from a lot of people. How do you deal with a community like that?
Very sorry to hear that, first off.
It's really put me off doing it.
Yeah, I definitely understand, and incredibly sorry that you had that experience. We do try to talk to many of our community members and actually try to, when we have poisonous people, work with them to make them less poisonous. We very rarely ask people to leave the community, but it has happened in the past that especially rude people have been asked to, stop contributing and to stop, being on our bug tracker, harassing people. And this has included people of all levels of contributions. As a project, we do try to work very much internally on our issues. We know that we're not a perfect project. If WordPress was perfect, I probably wouldn't want to work on it as much. The fact that there are a lot of challenges makes it a little more exciting. In October, we actually had a community summit, and one of the topics that we discussed was how do we deal with poisonous people? And that led to a very spirited discussion about how do we make sure that that doesn't happen. We also had a discussion about the overall contributor process and what we can do to both speed things up so that patches get reviewed and committed quicker, but also so that people get better feedback, quality feedback quicker, earlier, and that no one has a poor experience. If you do have any patches withstanding that you want someone to take a look at it, I'd love to take a look and try to help your changes get in.
Okay, shall I hit you up on Twitter?
Hit me up on Twitter or grab me after this.
Cool.
WordPress is in a state where you're trying to transition between everything from SaaS, and it's kind of like you've half done it for everything? Why don't you just kind of, and also PHP 5.2 you're still supporting, right? Why don't you guys just say, all right, we're going to stop, we're going to make a new version, we're not going to support backwards, everything is going to transition to SAS and whatever. Why don't you do that? Like, because it feels like I would like that, because I can use all my new tools from PHP 5.6, 5.7 that's come out.
So first off, you can use anything you want in your personal projects. Your WordPress theme or WordPress plugins can use PHP 5.6. WordPress runs perfectly well in PHP 5.6. It runs well in HHVM. Just because we support old versions doesn't mean we also don't support newer versions. A lot of it comes down to one of the biggest reasons we've been as successful as we are is that we don't break backwards compatibility without very specific intent to break backwards compatibility. It's rare that we break backwards compatibility for anything that could be considered major or core to WordPress. And a lot of times when we do, we actually go through all of our themes and all of our plugins that are in the WordPress repositories and check them. The biggest reason, though, why we don't just, say, all right, at the end of this release, we're going to start a new one, is that it would stop the release cycle. If you look at, Drupal 7 versus Drupal 8, how many years has Drupal 8 been in development? We like to release often. We don't think that it's better to, hold off a release just to do something new, do something nice. During the Go PHP 5 initiative, Drupal joined on the bandwagon very early and said that they were going to go to PHP 5 with their next major version. WordPress, we didn't jump on the bandwagon right away. What we decided is that we weren't going to go to PHP 5 until enough of our user base was on PHP 5. We didn't want to abandon our users. Most users of WordPress have no idea what PHP is, let alone what version of PHP they are running. And so we waited, we worked with the hosts instead that actually had control of it and got them to upgrade the PHP version. And so at the end of the day, the versions of WordPress and the versions of Drupal that supported PHP 5.2 as a minimum version actually came out nearly within about 3 months of each other. And so we would much rather release often and iterate and improve over time than do a whole-scale rewrite that causes releases to stop. Any more? Thank you very much.